Thank you. Well, thank you for such a kind introduction. I'll do my best to live up to it. Kansas reminds me of Indiana a little bit. You'd never stand next to somebody in silence waiting for an elevator. So I was on my way down from the room and met this very pleasant, very impressive woman who we exchanged pleasantries, and of course you got to make a little small talk. So she said, "Oh, how about now? All right." I was just sharing the small talk I was making with somebody waiting for the elevator on my way down, and she turned to me and said, "I hope this speaker they lined up is interesting." So I said, "I hope so too. I promise to do my best. I'll check in later with her for a review." I really am thankful to be here and want to acknowledge, first of all, what an impressive state party you have. And so, Chairman Gibson, Vice Chair Vicky, the whole committee that I've got to know have built something really impressive here, and we're going to need it. We're honored to have with us former Health and Human Services Secretary Kathleen Sebelius, Governor Sebelius. Former U.S. Attorney, and I'm told somebody who might have another title next to his name one day not too long from now, Barry Grissom. From your state legislative caucus, minority leaders Anthony Hensley and Jim Ward. Whose successes we hope to emulate in state houses around the country in this coming cycle. One of America's newest mayors, Michelle De La Isla, who is so kind to welcome me. Already has inspired and impressed a lot of people in the community of mayors. I want to make sure you know that. And so many other friends that I've got to know through the years, to the DNC committee members who answered my phone calls when I was running for DNC chair, which not everybody did, so I really appreciate the Kansas folks being kind enough to do that. And the Kansas Young Democrats who actually endorsed me when I was running. By the way, National Chapter of the Year. They were voted this year, so congratulations to you. Learned so much in my afternoon session with them, and we had a round table also with organized labor leaders from around the state who mean so much to the party, the backbone of the party in so many ways, and I thank you for what you do. Also had an opportunity to explore Topeka a little bit, and saw North Topeka, saw what's going on as your downtown is coming back to life. I wasn't sure what emotions I was going to feel on one of the stops, which I was invited to go see a place called Equality House, across the street from a little neighborhood church that you got here. I'm just leaving aside the gay stuff. I wasn't sure how I'd feel, to be honest, because I wasn't sure I was prepared to see an upside-down flag on a flagpole. It occasionally fell to me to hand a flag to somebody and say, on behalf of the President of the United States, the Secretary of the Navy, and a grateful nation, I present you with this flag as a token of our appreciation for your loved one's service to our nation. And so I wasn't sure what mix of emotions I was going to feel when I saw that place. Then I saw what was across the street from that place. A rainbow-colored house. It really does fight fire with love. I don't know if it's how they view it there, but to me it was very much a ministry, what they're doing. And it was such a great symbol for what we've got to be. For seeing, when we are presented with the worst, for seeing a way to make sure that that brings out not the worst in us, but the very best in us. And that's what we as a party can do too. And I'm so excited to be with you to celebrate how we can get that done. I thought what I'd do is I'd share a little bit about South Bend's story, and then share a couple ideas about where our party is headed. And South Bend really does remind me of Topeka and vice versa. Kansas reminds me of Indiana in so many ways. And I don't just mean comparing cornfields, although I made sure to do that on the drive over. But I also see communities positioning themselves for growth by reviving their core and enriching their neighborhoods. And I see a so-called red state with a great progressive tradition and an unbelievably energized Democratic Party. Which is good news, because there has not been a more important season for Democrats in my lifetime. And so much of what has to happen, so much of what has to change, starts right here in the middle of this country. I think so much of the next chapter of the American story is going to be written in communities like this, communities like where you and I come from. If you visit my hometown, South Bend, Indiana, you'll see right away it's not a typical college town. We're proud of our colleges and universities, of course, but before places like Notre Dame put us on the map, we were an industry town. We were a great manufacturing center, headquarters of Studebaker and a dozen other major companies that powered us into the 20th century. And when Studebaker collapsed in 1963, it brought our city to its knees. Factories that used to throb with activity were silent. Houses that were full of life and love and hope were crumbling and vacant. When I was a little kid going to school, I didn't even realize that the empty buildings looming over the route to get to school weren't something that every city had. And there's a lot of America that shares some version of that story. By 2011, the time I got into the race for mayor in South Bend, Newsweek had a feature on the 10 dying cities in America, and we were on that list. And it hurt. It could have finished us off, but our community took that as a call to action. It shook us up. We didn't try to wish it away or ignore it. We talked about it. And a few years later, we were experiencing the comeback of a century. I hope you get to see it for yourself if you haven't yet. I'm in my 7th year, and I'm proud to report to you that we now, this once dying city, is experiencing the fastest population growth in a quarter of a century. We addressed 1,000 vacant and abandoned houses in 1,000 days. We used data and technology to build transparency and serve residents better. We saw unemployment go from double digits to sometimes below the national average. And by the way, we still make things. Our advanced manufacturing workers are sending their products to Asia, not their jobs, and we're proud of it. The South Bend story is a story that shows that American workers can play a role in a modern global economy, and not just the role of victim. We haven't solved all of our issues, but it hasn't been this good in a lifetime. And I want people to hear that story, not just because I'm a proud mayor of a great community, but because it illustrates that Americans can find solutions by building on what we already have and innovating in new ways, guided always by our progressive values. So often the answers come from right around us, our cities and our counties, right here in the American heartland. And yet so little of attention has come to our part of the country because we can't take our eyes off of Washington. Now, politically, it's hard these days to talk about local solutions. It's hard to talk about any solutions because of this mesmerizing horror show going on in our capital. And that's what it is. Every day this president is in office, he yanks out a thread from the very fabric of what it means to be an American. He says, you don't belong here. And we're losing a thread. He says, you can't serve your country. And he tears out a thread. He says, your hatred is justified. And another thread is gone. And he will keep pulling one thread at a time, unraveling our republic until the American dream is just a tangled mess of yarn in his little hands. I've been discouraged from getting into the hand size controversy, but I couldn't help myself. So it's hard to look away, the nasty behavior, the palace intrigue, the crazy characters. And you see this chaos and corruption, and it's hard to think of anything else. But frankly, I'm not here to make the case against Donald Trump. Not because it doesn't need to be made, but because that's right. It's been made and it's well known. We don't even argue over whether the president behaves well or tells the truth. We just argue over whether it matters. Americans already know that lying is wrong, that racism is wrong, that denigrating women is wrong. Americans know about Russia. They know all about him. We all know all about him. Americans are waiting to see who will be talking about them. This is about so much more than one president. And it's about a lot more than Congress, too, although now is a good time to take a look at whether we should ever listen to Republican members of Congress again. No. I'm a young man, but I'm just old enough to say things like, I'm old enough to remember when. And I'm old enough to remember when in the 1990s they told us Bill Clinton would ruin the economy. I'm old enough to remember in the 2000s when they said we ought to deregulate the financial industry, because what's the worst that could happen? Old enough to remember them telling us that climate change wasn't real, that going to war in Iraq would be easy, and that our country would get safer every time they made it easier for just about anyone to get just about any gun anywhere in this country. And of course, they told us that tax cuts pay for themselves. Now we're in Kansas. Living proof that the radical conservative experiment has failed. So I don't have to tell you what happened when Governor Brownback got busy slashing taxes while refusing to expand Medicaid, denying health care to rural communities just as the opioid crisis was beginning to explode. Budget shortfalls, education cuts, crumbling roads and infrastructure, jobs lost. Kansas deserves better. And yet over in Washington, a house full of Republican members of Congress look at the Brownback disaster and say, you know what we need? We need to give the whole country a taste of this. So we already know how badly this president and this party, his party, are failing. But I'm here to tell you that the truth is, no matter how powerful the case against this president, no matter how obvious the case against this Congress, it will never be enough for people to hear only what we are against. The hard truth is that right around the time the Republican Party lost its mind, the Democratic Party, nationally, showed signs of losing its way. We started hesitating to talk about our values. We weren't paying attention to state and local races like our conservative friends were. And we became so obsessed with talking about him that voters at home asked, who's talking about me? But now's our chance to change all that. First of all, it's our chance to look beyond the White House, paying attention to those crucial state and local offices, and stop treating the presidency like it's the only office that matters. And here, too, Kansas is ahead of the curve. Look at 2016 and the legislative seats that were won here. Biggest net gain for any state legislature in the country. And this year, we are this close to breaking the supermajority here, and we're going to be able to do that in a lot of states around this country. Another thing we got to do is field candidates in every race. And I was so inspired to see candidates stepping up, even in the toughest races around this state. I know the competitive primaries that are going on can put a little pressure on our family ties, but they also show we have a vibrant party. People stepping up to compete, right and left. That's what we call a good problem to have. And we got to realize it's not just about the next election. It's about organizing for a new era, because there's no going back, not after what happened in 2016. American politics will be different forever, and we have got to be ready. We need a message that holds true not just in one election, or against one opponent, or in the eyes of one group, but to everyone at every level, everywhere, and every year. And we do. I am not one of those Democrats lamenting that Democrats don't have a message. Don't let anybody tell you we don't have a message. Of course we have a message. And it's this. We support and protect people going about their everyday lives. That's our message. That's why we're Democrats. How do we do it? How do we support people in everyday life? By defending the values of freedom, families, and fairness. all of which are themes that we've got to take back from our conservative friends across the aisle. Like freedom, which was Democratic bedrock ever since FDR saved the nation in the free world. Freedom from what? Freedom from fear. See, our Republican friends use the word freedom all the time. They mean it. They're sincere, but their idea of freedom is terribly thin. Because freedom from government is the only freedom they can imagine. They forget how many other things can make somebody unfree. So they say that getting rid of government's all you need to establish freedom. But I say you're not free if you can't change jobs or start a business because you're afraid of losing your health coverage. You're not free. You are less free if a credit card company can stick you with an arbitration clause, means you can't sue them even if they get caught ripping you off. You're not free if you got to wonder whether your kid is safe at school, because there is legally nothing anyone can do to keep an assault rifle out of the hands of a teenager with mental illness. And you're most certainly not free if some county clerk you never met gets to tell you who you ought to marry. We're the party of freedom. And we know that good government secures freedom just as much as bad government threatens it. Now let's talk about fairness. Another theme that is Democratic bedrock that I'm afraid this president and the other party have stolen from us, and we've got to be willing to talk about how fairness can bring us together. Now, the president was half right when he said that there was unfairness in politics and economy. But who can look at their party and think they made it any better? They're the party that rejects higher wages. We're the party that believes in a fair day's pay for a fair day's work. We're the ones that believe in equal pay for men and women doing the same job because it is fair. They're the party of Chris Kobach. Someone hell-bent on making it harder, not just for people in Kansas, but all across America to be able to vote. We're the party that fights for every eligible voter to have a fair chance at exercising that right. We're the ones standing up for fair districts, not some gerrymandered crazy quilt that lets politicians pick their voters instead of the other way around. And we're the party that stands up to big banks that rip people off. And yes, we are proud to be the party of organized labor that knows that everyone's better off when workers are paid and treated fairly. Now let's talk about family. Let's talk about family values. And again, I will resist the temptation to even discuss the family values on display right now in this White House. It's tempting, but I'm not going to do it. I want to talk about what it means to put forward candidates and policies that support real live families when it comes to everyday life in America. Mass deportations, tearing parents and children out of each other's arms, is as far away from pro-family as a policy can get. A pro-family party is one that makes sure families can get the resources they need to thrive. Good pay, health care, and yes, a free, quality public education. Pro-family leadership supports working parents. That's why in South Bend, starting New Year's Day this year, we now offer every employee 6 weeks paid family leave so that parents can get to know their kids, because it's the right thing to do for families. And as somebody who's starting to think about starting a family, someone who's getting married in June, That's a right I didn't even have 3 years ago. And now Chasten and I can start a family. So I would add that a party that recognizes that love is what a pro-family party looks like. Freedom, fairness, family. Those are our values, not because they make for nice speeches or good theory, but because we know what they mean to real people living everyday life. And it's time for Democrats to speak that language of real life, like we know how to do in this part of the country, to build a new politics of the everyday that will light our path forward. Radical conservative experiments have failed when you look at them in the harsh light of what actually happens on the ground. What I love working about the local level is that there are no alternative facts when it comes to people's everyday experience. I filled in the pothole or I didn't. It's not like proving whether I was born in the U.S. It's right there for everybody to see. Now, sometimes I go set up a card table in a school or neighborhood center just so anybody who didn't catch me at a council meeting or buttonhole me at the grocery knows they can have a one-on-one with the mayor. And I do it because nothing is more real than looking into the eyes of a constituent and hearing about their reality. You can lie to somebody about a lot of things, but not their own lives. That's why it was so powerful last year at those town halls, when men and women stood up to members of Congress and explained what the Affordable Care Act meant to them. And that's why a nation has been called to its conscience by a movement of grieving teenagers not even old enough to vote, but speaking with the moral clarity of a child let down by adult politicians. We need more of that clarity in our politics right now. And my new political project, Hitting Home, is organized around narrative, helping people tell their stories to move the center of gravity of American politics back to everyday life, as it is impacted in 1,000 ways by good and bad policy. Because all politics is local, especially state and national politics. Every policy experiment hits home for somebody. Certainly true for my generation. Say what you will about the millennial generation, but I'll tell you what being in that generation means to me. Our generation provided most of the men and women who served in Iraq and Afghanistan. We came of age with school shootings as the norm. And we're the generation that will see the business end of climate change in our lifetimes. Our generation stands to be the first in American history not to live longer and more prosperous lives than our parents unless we do something about it now. And it's not just generational for me, it's personal. I sat down with loved ones facing cancer, talked about what we would do if Congress kicked them off the health care they get through the Affordable Care Act. I've looked into the eyes of an 8-year-old boy, an 8-year-old American boy, who lost his father to a deportation, and tried to tell him and convince myself that things are going to be okay. I've called 911 for a young man on a front lawn having an overdose and rolled him over, propped up against my shin so that he wouldn't choke to death. I've stood in basements flooded by extreme rainfall, hitting our city just the way the scientists have warned us about for decades. 1,000-year rain, and then a 500-year flood, less than 2 years apart. Climate change isn't about ice shelves for me. It's about neighborhoods. And I've carried a weapon in a foreign land on the orders of an American president. See, when President Trump and his sons were busy with season 7 of Celebrity Apprentice, I was driving and guarding convoys outside the wire in Afghanistan.
What, no bones first?
Since you brought that up, traditional for the president to manage to visit troops in a combat zone at least once in his first year. I can't help but notice that this president hasn't gotten around to it. So if you run into him anywhere, you might want to remind him that that would be nice. So when I was doing that, I had a lot of responsibilities, but the one that really mattered was making sure that the men and women in my vehicle got where they were going alive. And when they got in my vehicle, I promise you, they did not care if I was a Democrat or Republican. They cared about whether the route I selected had the fewest IED threats, not where my father immigrated from and whether he was documented or undocumented. They cared about whether my M4 was locked and loaded and whether I knew how to use it, not whether I was going home to a girlfriend or a boyfriend. They just wanted to get home safe like I did. And whatever divides us, the ground truth of everyday life is something we all have in common. These are the things we care about. Taking care of the people we love, having a shot at building a better life, coming home safe. These are the things that move us. And they have the power to bring us together. Whether you're a worker looking to keep his job at a tool and die shop, or a parent of an African American teen having the talk about what to do if you get pulled over by law enforcement, or a dreamer looking for a chance to go to college, or the spouse of a police officer kissing them goodbye on their way to work, or a transgender kid in high school in South Bend who just has to use the bathroom like everybody else. It is about everyday life. And that's where our part of the country in particular has so much to offer right now. Because for years, our so-called flyover states were mostly being ignored by political experts and coastal observers. And I don't know if you've noticed this, but I feel like that's changing. We're now being studied with exotic fascination by some of the people who used to ignore us. It's almost like we're fashionable. That just might be a good thing. Not just for us, but for the country. People need to hear about communities in the middle of the country reshaping our destiny for a brighter future. People need to hear about veterans and rural Americans who care about progressive values like freedom, family, and fairness just as much as urban and coastal Americans do. And yes, people need to hear about a big blue wave in those so-called red states with the power to change the political landscape for generations. So in the name of everyday life, in the name of the people we love, in the name of a great country that knows it deserves better, we will run in every district. We will knock on every door. We will talk to every neighbor and defend our values to everyone who will listen and anyone who won't. We are motivated, we are ready, and we care not just about winning, but about deserving to win. That's the difference. Our message is better, our policies are better, our candidates are better. All that's left is for us to go out there and deliver. And I am proud, so proud, to be with you in the fight. Thank you, and let's get to work.